Welcome to the Outhouse Lounge. This is where we relax and talk about shit. Yes, that's right, I said it. I'm Chris Cordani, your host, and serving up the drinks as well as the questions. Joining me today is one of the great actors of our time, one of the great character actors, regular actors, you name it, he was it. He's played everything from a high school brain with a good arm, very good arm, by the way, a pie-throwing arm, to a sharp-tongued debate team leader, to an evil genius scientist, actually two of them, to be honest with you, to a mob boss, a made man. He's one of the great voiceover artists of our time as well. And I'm very happy to have him on the show with me. Without further, I hate saying without further ado, but I'm doing it this time because it just warrants such a good phrase. Welcome to the Outhouse Lounge, Eddie Deezen.
Hi, Chris. Great to be here.
It's great to have you on with me. I know you probably don't remember. I had you on my other show, Revenge of the 80s Radio, many, many years ago.
Sounds familiar.
We enjoyed it, and the audience enjoyed it. I wanted to bring you on the Outhouse Lounge, and I thank you for being here.
My pleasure. It is definitely my pleasure.
I got to tell you, I've been following you for a long time. I love watching your stuff on social media, so we are going to be talking about some of the cool stuff that you bring up, especially one of the greatest bands of all time. We have to do this.
Okay, and I appreciate you following me. You're not the only one. The cop's been following me for months. No, I'm just kidding.
I do want to say, I know you had a rough go of it last couple of years, and
yeah.
a lot of your fans are going to be wanting to know the answer to this question.
Sure.
So,
I'll give you an honest answer to anything you ask.
Excellent. How are you doing now? I mean,
I'm all better. Health-wise, I'm doing great. I'm staying. You know, Steve, my manager, Steve Joyner, one of the best managers in all show business. He's my father. He's my brother. He's my manager. He's my best friend. He's done everything for me. His beautiful wife, Denise, they're taking good care of me. I'm in a city in South Carolina, and I'm having a great stay. My health is really good. Stevie and I do a lot of walking, and my heart feels fine. So that's better. And mentally, I'm fine. There was a lot of mental problems because I was just overprescribed with a lot of meds, and my system couldn't handle them. I was on like 20 meds a day. I had open heart surgery in 2020. I was put on like 20 meds, and I started going really haywire. So that created a lot of trouble for me and resulted in some bad things, but whatever. You get through it. It's called life. Like my brother said, it's called life.
Exactly. And I'm glad you're here. And anybody who knows you and listens to you and has watched you over the years is very happy to hear that you're doing well. And
thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks for saying that on here. And again, thanks to Steve, who was a good guy. I was talking to him on and off for this, and he set this whole thing up. It's a good thing you have good guys like that taking care of you.
Absolutely. I'm very blessed. I'm very lucky.
Yeah. And you've had a blessed career. I know you've done so many of these career-spanning interviews. I do want to go through some of this, and I do want to go through some of the highlights, but I also want to talk about some of the other cool stuff that you do and things that go through your mind and things that changed your life. But first off, how did you get into acting? And again, it's a common misconception that Grease was considered your first movie, which apparently it really isn't.
Well, this is the fact of it is, Chris, Grease was my first film. It's the first film I ever worked on. I worked on it in the summer of 1977. I worked on it for 2 months, and that was my first film. My second was a low-budget sci-fi film called Laser Blast. That was the second I filmed. I worked on that for 3 days, and then I did a film called I Want to Hold Your Hand, probably my best work ever with the great Bob Zemeckis, my all-time favorite director. That was the first film Steven Spielberg ever produced. Now, that was the order I worked on them, and it was Grease, Laser Blast, I Want to Hold Your Hand. But they were released in this order. Laser Blast was released first. Then I Want to Hold Your Hand was released second. Grease was released third in the summer of 1978. So people get a little confused. But Grease was definitely my first film, yeah.
Right, and I did misspeak. I did want to say that was the first film released, not the first film you worked on. But I did want to say that's
sir.
So technically that's your first film, but technically it isn't your first film. And that's
exactly. It depends on how you look at it.
Right. So if you're answering questions about what's Eddie Deezen's first film when it comes to Jeopardy, the first film that he worked on.
Right. Definitely it would be Grease.
Right.
It would be Grease. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And the first one that was
I mean, I lucked out.
Yeah,
as you know, showbiz, most people, their first film is usually a grade B film or worse, you know. Almost everybody, you know, Steve McQueen's first film was the Revenge of the Blob or something, you know. Most people do not work on good films. Or maybe that was Clint Eastwood out of Turkey, I know. Burt Reynolds' first film was called Angel Baby. You know, I started, my first film was a classic. I said, you know, it's the greatest musical of all time. So I definitely lucked out. That was my first movie, Grease. That was the first film I worked on, and it was a joy.
I want to put this film in perspective. You
Sure.
were a comedian for a while. This is your first big break, your first huge
Right.
film.
Yeah.
Not only was it a huge success, you and a lot of young actors of the time were working alongside of comedy legends. You're with Eve Arden. You're with
Right.
Sid Caesar. Great
Right.
people like that.
Yeah.
As a young up and coming actor / comedian, what was it like? Did you get pointers from these guys, or did they take time to help you guys out a little bit?
Not necessarily pointers. Remember, my role was so small in the film. I didn't do anything of much consequence. I'm in the film. I walk down the stairs and I get my hair messed up by the T-birds. And my big scene, I get hit in the face with a pie, and then you'll see me jumping around in the dance scene a little bit. So I'm in Greece, but it's far from the best thing I've ever done. It's not really anything of any consequence, but I'm in the film. I always compare it to, I always go, it's like one of the dead bodies in Gone with the Wind. Gone with the Wind was the biggest movie of all time. And there's the big battlefield scene. There's all, that scene where there's all these corpses after the war, and there's all these corpses. Every one of those guys spent the rest of their life saying, I'm in Gone with the Wind. They were a corpse in the biggest movie of all time, Gone with the Wind. So I'm kind of like that in Greece. I'm Eugene. I'm the nerdy guy. And since everybody's seen Greece, everybody knows me from that film, even though I have a pretty small role.
But I did enjoy one of Michael J. Fox's first films, if not his first. I think that was one of his first. That was Midnight Madness. That was
Michael's first film. He was a great guy. Michael. That was his first film. That was 1980. Michael was a kid. He was probably the youngest one in the cast. And Michael and I, we would have lunch together. We'd talk about our favorite episodes of The Twilight Zone. We both loved The Twilight Zone, and we'd talk about that. And I had this big Super Bowl I used to carry, Chris. After lunch, Michael and I would go to this brick wall at Disney Studios. We'd play handball together with my Super Bowl. I remember that. Now, cut to 5 or 6 years later, I'm on the lot at Universal. This red Ferrari spins up and screeches in front of me, I look up. It's Michael J. Fox. He's in the red Ferrari. He's the biggest star in the world now. Back to the Future come out. He's the biggest star in the world. He was the same guy, Chris. Hadn't changed a bit. Totally unpretentious. Hey, Eddie, how you doing? Blah, blah, blah. We, like you do, we shot the shit, for a little while. We talked. He was the same sweet guy. Didn't change him a bit. I love Michael, and he's a wonderful guy. Wonderful. He's such a brave guy. He's an example to all of us for what he's been through, how he's handled it.
Exactly. It's nice to hear that because you hear a lot of really horrible things about people, and you hear about these that people don't get along with other people in Hollywood, that sort of thing. They're hard to work with. It's nice to know that a lot of fans want to like the people that they watch on television. They want to like their favorite stars, and it sounds a lot like. Obviously, you're here. You're very likable, but it sounds a lot like you've met a lot of really good people along the way that were
absolutely
nice and likable. And Michael,
very few have been not pleasant. I always say the biggest stars I've met so many celebrities. The biggest stars are almost always nice people, almost inevitably. Jerry Lewis was a rare exception. That story's just an isolated one. The biggest stars I've worked with, Tom Hanks, John Travolta, all are the nicest people, inevitably. I had a little trouble with David Carradine. We had kind of a bad meeting, and that's pretty much about it. Usually they're just super nice people. I think my theory is they don't have anything to prove. When you're a big star, you don't have anything to prove. It's like the black belt in karate. They go, the guy that has a black belt in karate walks around, he's the most serene, he doesn't walk around picking fights. He's the most serene guy because he knows he can whip anybody's ass, but it's the barroom brawler, that gives you trouble. This drunk, loose guy, gives you trouble on the street, but that's my theory about it.
That makes a lot of sense because, again, you made it, you relax a little bit. You're not trying to cut anybody else's head off. At least that's in theory. In radio, it's a little different sometimes, but I can get to that at another time. It's not I'm not doing a radio.
Okay.
For those who are listening to the podcast and not watching it, I'm with Eddie Deezen. You do recognize the voice of some of the great voices of all time. If you were a little guy watching the Polar Express, you might remember the talkative kid. If you're a fan of Dexter's Laboratory, you might remember Mandark, and you also would hear this voice in loads of commercials. I want to get to Mandark, but sure. I was a fan of your other evil genius, Menlo Schwartzer.
Oh yeah, Surf 2. I love that movie. That's one of my favorite. That was a B movie, but it's a great movie. That's one of the few movies. I think I was top billed in like 3 or 4 movies in my whole career. That's maybe the first one. Great movie. I enjoyed making it so much. I just did my last podcast, Chris, was all Surf 2. We went through the whole film and did commentary on it. It was really fun. But I loved doing that movie. It was so much fun. Linda Carriage, I don't know if she might have done other films. I think she might have done horror films after that. I think they told me she did that, but she was great. Eric Stoltz, who is in it, was to do Mask. He's immortal because of his role in Mask, one of the great movies ever made. Eric and I used to play poker together, and he loved pizza, I remember. He liked greasy pizza. We would order pizza, and he goes, get it extra greasy. literally. So we get greasy pizza for Eric. He was a super nice guy. Jeffrey, I don't know what happened to him, but I love the whole cast. Peter Isaacson, I worked my Magnum PI episode. We got to go to Hawaii, and Peter and I worked together again. And Peter is the nicest guy in the world. I loved him. I can tell you about Tom Selleck too, the Peter nicest, Isaacson, big star, nicest guy in the world.
Yeah, Peter Isaacson, that's the guy who played Pruitt on CPO Sharky, right?
Yeah, exactly. And he's in my Magnum episode. I don't know if you ever saw my Magnum episode, but Peter's in that one too. And he's just a super great guy. Peter used to run a voiceover place in Hollywood, and I used to do voiceovers for him all the time. But now he's just retired, living the good life.
That would be a cool guy to have on one day. I'll have to figure that out one day. But anyway,
he's got a lot of great stories, I'm sure. I mean, working with Don Rickles, what can you say?
Yeah. Oh yeah, and the dynamic between the two. I saw that the TV Guide photo with a TV Guide cover where they're standing next to each other, and you had Rickles on the stool, on the step stool, but he was still shorter than Pruitt, which is pretty funny.
Right.
But,
you might want to. How about also wasn't Barry Pearl on that show from Grease?
Yeah, Barry Pearl from Grease was on the show. He was Mignoni.
Yeah. Okay. Have you interviewed him?
No, but I wanted to get the guy who played Skolnick, David Lansbury, but he passed on before I had the brains enough to figure it out.
Oh, I'm sorry. I remember him.
Yep.
Was he the guy in Barney Miller?
I don't know. That's the wrong one.
Oh, that's Steve Landesberg.
Right. Yeah, this guy was a different guy. He had an interesting movie. It's on YouTube somewhere. It's good stuff. I was a big fan of CPO Sharky.
Okay, I never saw it. I mean, right. Rickles would come. I saw Rickles live, and I never drink, but we drank gin and tonics. Chris, those times when you laugh, you think you're going to die from pain. We just laughed our guts out. My ribs just hurt. And my stomach was sore for about a couple hours. I never laughed so hard a show in my life, but he was so funny in Las Vegas. Luckily, he didn't pick on me. The thing about the Rickles show is it's kind of scary because you see he walks around and you think he's going to get you. And I'm praying, please don't let him get me. Luckily, he left me alone. I think he felt sorry for me.
Oh, I got to tell you, if I never got to see Don Rickles, but I think you go to these things expecting to get insulted. Have a few beers and just say, "Hey,
you're right.
Pick me." Like a teacher.
It kind of takes courage. You know what I did too? Also, my first show, Chris, was at the Comedy Store in West Hollywood. That was the first thing I did in 1976. But I did my routine anyway. Before I did my routine, we went one time, and the big star at the time was Jimmy Walker. And we didn't know at the Comedy Store, because of the insult factor, you don't want front seats. So they go, my friend Mike and I came in and they go, you could sit in the front. And we were right on the stage. We're right on the rim of the stage. And everybody else was back there. And we realized those aren't such good seats at the Comedy Store because the comedians will pick on you and insult you. You want to sit at a safer seat and enjoy the show. But luckily, they left us alone. I remember Jimmy Walker staring down at me, and luckily he left me alone too. But I remember being scared he was going to insult me.
I like insult guys. I remember once.
You like it, and you can take insults?
Are you kidding? I love them because at least they know I'm here. It's you go to these things just again, you're like Horshack saying, ooh,
yeah,
me. And then you can go home and say to everybody, "Wow, wait, you know what he said to me?" Blah blah.
Right. He, by the way, was a good friend of mine. Ron Palillo was in Surf 2, as you know, and he was the greatest guy in the world, the sweetest guy in the world. He died way too young. He used to be a big time smoker, and he died way too young. I'm sorry he's gone. I love them.
Yeah, they try. I think there was a proposal to put together a spin-off for him, I believe.
Is that right? Well, I used to watch the show. It's funny, when I was in 1975, I was actually, living in Maryland. I'm watching Cotter. Little did I know, in 2 years, I'm going to be filming with Grease with John Travolta. Yeah. But I would watch the show, and I thought he would be the runaway star. I thought he'd be the breakaway star. I watched it, and I thought that, I could see John. Maybe you had to be a girl to see John Travolta's appeal. He was such a sex symbol. But I thought, Horshack was the funniest one. So I thought this guy's going to be the breakaway star, but it didn't happen that way. John was the star, and he left everybody in the dust.
You did mention, and I want to get back to this because, again, I love following your stuff on Nosebook. You talked about some of the people of your influences and people and
you mean Facebook?
Movies. Yeah. I call it Nosebook because people get nosy. So
I thought you were insinuating brown noser or something. Okay, I get it. Okay.
No.
Okay.
No, but you were talking about some of the people and great actors and movies that changed your life, that sort of thing. I understand you that one of the big influences was a name you mentioned earlier that you said really wasn't a very pleasant fellow, Jerry Lewis. Yeah,
my encounter with Jerry Lewis was traumatic. It absolutely was traumatic. I mean, I said, it was for me, because I worshiped them all my life, and my character was patterned after Jerry Lewis and Daffy Duck. That's the two I really worship, and I spent time with her. All right, you guys, and I tried to base it on that. That's what I try to base on, those two guys. So I couldn't meet Daffy Duck. So I'm meeting Jerry Lewis. I'd seen Jerry live in Vegas, and I swear he was the most talented human being I'd ever seen. He was unreal. And I worshiped the guy. So I'm going to finally meet him. He was there, Chris, he was autographing his DVD, The Jazz Singer. So I bought 5 DVDs. I'm going to meet Jerry Lewis. So I'm waiting in line, and there's this long line. I'm waiting, I'm like a kid, waiting to ask a pretty girl out for the prom. I'm rehearsing my lines. Hi, Jerry, I'm your biggest fan. I've loved y'all. My favorite film of yours is The Stooge, and I rehearsed it down. So I get up, finally, after a 20-minute wait, I'm there in line. No, this is what happened to. Didn't want to leave out one part. When I'm up there, Chris, Jerry saw me and he did a double take. This is true. He saw me and there was a clear path and he did a double take. I didn't know what that was about, but I'll get to that in my next story. But he did a double take. Anyway, I get up to him. I go, my line. I give him my DVDs. Jerry, I'm your biggest fan. I love you so much. The Stooge is my favorite film of yours. I loved you with Dean Martin, blah, 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 blah. Dead silence. Crickets. I go, rack, crickets. Jerry, yada, 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 crickets, nothing. He didn't say a word. Finally, I finished that, and then finally he goes, thank you. It was like a kid being told by his grandmother, thank you, grandmother, for the underwear she bought you for Christmas. So it's like a perfunctory thank you. And I was traumatized. I walked away. I was almost crying. He wouldn't respond to me. He was so cold. The place froze up. It was like 0 degrees out there. It froze up. So I get back to my manager. He sees me go, what happened? He could see I was distraught. I go, I just met Santa Claus and he kicked me in the balls. I mean, that incident stuck with me for years. Anyway, cut to Facebook, Chris. You call it Nosebook. Call it Facebook. This happened about 6 months ago. One of my friends on Facebook happened to know Jerry Lewis. He worked with him on the telethons. And they were there at the telethon. He told me this anecdote. He said he was with Jerry Lewis before the curtain went up at one of the telethons. And he goes, Jerry, you make me laugh more than anybody in the world except for Eddie Deezen. And Jerry goes, you're not the first person to tell me that. I'm good at plots. Jerry Lewis, I didn't even know he was aware of me, let alone he thought of me as, to think of me as competition. Jerry, that's kind of like Rembrandt being petty about a house painter. I'm to Jerry Lewis what Rembrandt is to some house painter who paints your house with a brush. That's the comparison. But to him, it was a big deal. So that kind of ruined the moment for me, but I still love the guy. I always love him. It's like the girl you love, or the man. For a woman, it's like the man you love. Even though they treat you bad, you always love him in your heart. I always loved Jerry. He had such a profound effect on my life.
Sometimes you have to respect the talent, and if he wasn't a great man, I know it's not the same thing, but there's this big thing going on. It's what happened with Gary Glitter and all that. The fact is, his music was great, but you got to separate the man from the music sometimes.
Absolutely, yeah, you separate the man from the music, and the fact that we all do have our flaws and our eccentricities, and we all have a good side. Jerry was a mixed bag. I wrote the story on my Facebook page about Marlon Brando working for Charlie Chaplin. I'm going to paraphrase. He goes, Charlie Chaplin was an egotistical tyrant. He was a penny pincher. I hated him. But on the other hand, he was the greatest genius the media ever produced. He brought millions of people happiness. And he goes, and then he said the key line. He goes, he was a mixed bag like all of us. And I never forgot that last line. Jerry was a mixed bag. So am I. So are you. We're all mixed bags. We all have our pluses and minuses. We're all Jekyll and Hydes,
I suppose that's right. Or maybe if you're a fan,
maybe Jekyll and Hyde's a bad example because Jekyll wasn't that great. We're all plus and minus.
Or how about Heckle and Jive, Dr. Heckle and Mr. Jive?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Whatever that means.
The Men at Work song. There we go.
Oh, okay. No, I'm not up on Men at Work. Okay.
That's okay. No worries about that. Eddie, I remember you from one of the early movies as well. I Want to Hold Your Hand. I brought this up because not only was it one of your early movies, but you're also a big Beatles guy.
Yeah, I was playing myself. It's funny you say that, Chris. I just posted about it on my Facebook page today. I put a post of my picture. Stevie got me a picture of me from it, and I said, please put that up. Stevie posted a picture for me, and I put up and wrote about it. So that was my happiest experience, I think, ever doing a film. Bob Zemeckis is my all-time favorite director, and Stephen was there on the set. Stephen, that was the first film Stephen ever produced. People forget that. Yeah, there I am with Wendy Jo. Wendy Jo is the best comedy partner I ever had. I loved her. She passed away when I was doing the Polar Express, and it was such a loss. She had cancer, and the best comic talent I've ever worked with. A guy wrote, he said, if you guys had done more films together, you would have been one of the great comedy teams of all time. And I believe it. By the way, that's a great picture, Chris. That's a beautiful picture.
I was looking for one with you in this movie, and I saw, hey, wait, that's with Wendy Jo Sperber. I have to put this one
that's
up.
Our elevator scene. Yeah.
Oh,
That movie was such a joy, so much fun. Zemeckis, I mean, he was such a fine director, everything. And when I did Polar Express, Tom Hanks, he goes, I was kibitzing with Hank. Every day on Polar Express, I got the joy of it was I get to kibitz with Tom Hanks every day outside of working on the film. And he goes, I want to hold your hand. He goes, I love the way Zemeckis did that Beatles shot. He did like the Beatles, and it looked like the Beatles were really there. But you'll see, they never show the Beatles' faces, really. They just showed parts of their bodies and all. And that was the genius of Bob Zemeckis.
I always thought Ringo was an underestimated talent, and and
you know what I've been okay. You know what, Chris? No, you're right. And Stevie just got. Well, no, I'm sorry. A friend of mine sent me this really nice friend who happens to be a really rich guy. He's just a great guy named Rick. He sent me those Let It Be tapes. And, I'm watching Ringo drum there, and I'm just like you. You tend to underrate Ringo, but I see the way this guy drummed. He was a genius. He really was the best drummer in the world. You see, and I just go, I love Pete Best. I've worked with him, but you go, no way could Pete Best compete with this guy. Nobody could drum like that.
I heard a story from a friend of mine who is a big Beatles fan as well, and she was telling me that there was this. I guess somebody was yapping on about how Ringo was the least talented, and then was challenged to drum like Ringo at one point, and finding out that his work was high level drumming. It was tough to do just because a guy doesn't bang around the drums like Keith Moon or somebody like that. Or Herman Z. German. They're great drummers, by the way.
Right.
But you don't have to do that to be one of the greatest drummers of all time.
No, he is. After they finished the Let It Be show, they did the rooftop concert, January 30th, 1969. The next day, Paul sent Ringo a postcard. It said, "You're the best drummer in the world. Love, Paul." And that sums it up. He really is a great drummer. Now, he's at least talented as a composer. That's where his talent. Ringo never was a composer in the sense that the other three were. John and Paul were, of course, the greatest composers ever. And George had a lot of great songs, too. But Ringo composing wasn't his thing. He was a great drummer, and he would get a song and album to sing on, and he was always good.
He was suave, though, too. I mean, he had a presence about him, especially in the 70s after the Beatles broke up. He had some great solo stuff, and then later on in the 80s, what was the 80s? I think it was with the Seagram's commercials.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, Seagram's coolers. Cool. Yeah.
Some guys just define cool, and Ringo is that guy.
He's cool now. Yeah, exactly. He was kind of the geekiest in the Beatles years. He was the one, maybe the girls went crazy over the least. But my sister said after the Beatles split, he was the hottest Beatle. She said he was the hottest one when he had the beard and all that.
Right. And the ponytail.
Yeah.
I want to get one of those ponytails. I was tossed up. I either want to get a haircut like his in the 80s or one like Paul King's. But
who's Paul King? I'm sorry.
Oh, from King. He's a short-lived band from the 1980s out of Coventry. Okay. I know. I listen to a lot of weird stuff from the 80s. That's just
you're obviously an expert. I'm a layman on that stuff. I'm a Beatles expert, but people think that I know other bands, and I don't. I know a little bit about the Stones, but I know everything about the Beatles, but I don't know anything about the others.
I'm just a nerd. I just sat down and watched things. You did.
You know all the bands, yeah.
But you did things.
Everybody's got their own area with specialty,
Right. Well, you did things in the 80s, and that's what counts. I mean,
yeah.
You're too busy working and doing some and acting and to pay attention to stuff like I was.
Yeah.
Doing.
Anyway, to get back to I Want to Hold Your Hand, Stephen was on the set a lot. And we would hang out a lot. And this is a really great guy. And he was a wonderful, marvelous guy. And he made little contributions to the film too. He added it too. He was like, Bob and him were like, they were like really close comrades. You could see they were best friends. So he was there to help us. When we went on the promotional tour for I Want to Hold Your Hand, Stephen took us out. And that was my first lunch with Stephen. They took us out, and get this, they put us up in the Plaza Hotel, the suite where the Beatles stayed. We got to stay in the Beatles suite. And Stephen took us all out one day, blah, blah, blah. And he said, this movie. Now, sadly, the movie didn't do good at the box office, but Stephen was there. He goes, this movie's going to be like American Graffiti, And we thought it was going to be. It got great reviews, but for some reason, it just didn't do well at the box office. But it's a film I'm proud of.
It's going to happen, but people watch it anyway afterwards. DVDs.
Yeah, every Beatles fan's seen it. Right. Pete, I'll tell you a story. Pete Best, it was his favorite film. Pete Best and I did a signing show together, and I said, oh, Pete Best here. He goes, yeah, he requested to sit by you. Oh my God, Pete Best. He goes, why? He goes, because I Want to Hold Your Hand, his favorite film. So I sat with Pete Best, and he was the sweetest, nicest guy. But here's what it is. I was there with him. I spent 3 days with him, and I saw why he wasn't a Beatle. And you know what it was? He didn't have that wicked sense of humor. The Beatles, part of their charm was they were so funny. if you hear their press conferences and their movies, they were so intensely funny. They were hilarious, especially John. And Pete just wasn't a joke cracker. He wasn't a wise guy or anything. And he'd answer my questions and all. He was just a very straight, nice guy. He was soft-spoken, nice guy, but he wasn't joking. And I think it didn't fit. Whereas Ringo had a great sense of humor. I think he fit in better that way. If Pete had that great sense of humor, I think he might have been a Beatle.
Oh, that's interesting. I always speculate. I guess I speculated a lot being a music guy and a DJ all these years, thinking, hey, well, maybe it's just because he didn't want to go or didn't feel like, or it just wasn't, the chemistry just wasn't there, and it was kind of there with Ringo. But this makes a lot of sense.
I'll give you an example of the guy. Right. He was he was a great guy, but he wasn't like Lennon was such a complex guy, and Paul, they were all complex and Pete was just there, and it's like, okay, I'll give you an example. I go, hey Pete, why did you never comb your hair like the other Beatles? They combed their hair down and you always kept it into that Elvis cut. And he goes, they never asked me. I'm thinking, that's it? That's your answer? Didn't you ask them? Didn't you think of doing it? That's all. But he was just very there. He was just a regular guy you'd meet. He wasn't, I don't want to say colorful because he was a wonderful guy, but he didn't have that pizzazz that the Beatles had, that jazziness that they had. He was just a straight Liverpool guy and a really, really, really nice guy.
They always called Ringo Starr the luckiest man in show business or music history. Yeah. But the fact is, he really was a huge part of that sound.
He was a huge part of that sound. Absolutely. His drumming is great. Yeah. And also, like I say, his personality, that was a big thing. Again, if you look at those Beatles press conferences, Ringo contributed so much. He was a really funny guy.
Oh, yeah.
And he is to this day.
So here's a question. Again, I know I don't like to ask these questions of anybody, but since you're a Beatles guy, a couple of your favorite songs and why? From the Beatles?
Sure. My favorite all-time movie, I'll tell you, is A Hard Day's Night. So A Hard Day's Night has always been my favorite Beatles song. Hard Day's Night I'd seen it, I'd say 30 times. I love the film. I think it's the greatest movie ever made. Everything about it. I love it. That would be my favorite. Now, let's get to the others. They went through so many different eras. I love, let's see. I love She Loves You are the early ones, and I love I Want to Hold Your Hand. Then later I love Rain. It's not so well known, one of John's, a really bizarre song, but I love that one. I love Penny Lane. Penny Lane's a beautiful song. That's more Paul. Now, John would always say, I composed 70% of that song, which you can tell it's a Paul song. Come on. They would argue, but that's definitely a Paul song. John might have contributed a bit, but that's a Paul song. I love that one. Let's see. Oh, God. I love so much Rubber Soul Revolver. Wouldn't be She's a Woman. I like. You know what? I love Ticket to Ride. That's one of my favorites. I love that song.
That's a great one. I used to like Lady Madonna.
I'm sorry. One last one. That's Chris. You said it. That's it. Lady Madonna. I love Lady Madonna. That's definitely in my top 10. I love maybe my top 5. I love that song. You must be a mind reader.
Well, I used to like it because I played baritone in my high school jazz band, and nobody ever becomes great playing baritone. But we got to play some Beatles songs, and I got to play the really cool that riff in Lady Madonna, and I was the only baritone player, so I got to play that. That was
very cool.
So that's why I like this song.
No, you said it right on cue. Perfect timing.
Wow. All right. I thought you were going to go for a Norwegian Wood or something like, or Yellow Submarine.
I love Norwegian Wood. Yellow Submarine, I wouldn't say that's my favorite. I love the film, but it's not my favorite song.
I like that because I just like the song because I like.
You know how we all misunderstand Beatles lyrics too. I just read the greatest book, Chris. If you're a Beatles fan, it's called 150 Glimpses of the Beatles, and there was a chapter on how we all misunderstand Beatles lyrics. And I had always thought in Yellow Submarine, I always thought Ringo was saying "in the turn where I was born," and then he's saying "in the town." But I always thought he was saying "in the turn," Turn. I misunderstood those lyrics all these years.
I misunderstood lyrics all the time, and
the songs are so great, but I think we all have our misunderstood lyrics.
Yep, I remember I was younger. Do you remember the Steve Miller Band? Right, they did this song called "Fly Like an Eagle." I was hard of hearing as a kid for a little bit. I had a lot of wax in my ears, so I'm sitting here listening to it. I actually kept thinking, where it says "Time keeps on slipping into the future." It actually sounded to me, with the wax and the hard of hearing, "Tom keeps on sniffing into the kitchen." It doesn't make any sense.
My favorite of them, my all-time favorite is I love Living in the USA. That's definitely my favorite Steve Miller song. That's a classic. I love that song.
I always like Steve Miller, the Steve Miller Band.
Yeah, he's one of the Jewish rock stars, a rare Jewish rock star. There's the guy from Kiss, Gene Simmons, Steve Miller, Bob Dylan, but there's not a lot of us. Rock is Graham dominated.
Well, I would say that the 70s, and I don't think it's very easy to argue against this point, but 70s is when pop music hit its peak.
That's an interesting theory. The 60s was like the Renaissance. I like even the 50s. I like early Elvis. I love Hound Dog's still one of my favorites. When we were on the Grease set, when we were doing the dance scene, we did that Hound Dog. They played it over and over. We filmed that. That's the scene it was 116 degrees, and there was people fainting and all. And Michael Tucci had to be taken to the hospital, and they couldn't open the windows. There was like a factory that killed animals or something. You could smell the stench of the animals. Also, there was the sound of airplanes, so we had to keep the windows shut. But anyway, they kept playing Hound Dog over and over, and I was happy as a clam, even though it was hot. I go, this is the life, man. I'm in the movies. I'm dancing to my favorite song, Hound Dog. I was just so happy dancing to that song. That's my favorite Elvis song. So I like Elvis. I love some of Chuck Berry's songs. Chuck Berry, he had Johnny B. Good, I love. And then the 60s, there were so many great ones. There's thousands of them. 70s, there were like great ones. And then Stevie and I were talking. Rock kind of died in the 80s. The great rock songs, I think, kind of died in the 80s. And we went to other stuff.
Yeah, the classic rock was dying in the 80s. You still had your holdouts, like your George Thorogood's of the world and people like that, Robert Cray Band, stuff like that, but they didn't get the airplay that they may have gotten maybe 7-8 years beforehand. Tom Petty was another holdout, but and ZZ Top, but again...
Oh, ZZ Top, I love some of their songs. Yeah, they were great. They were the 90s?
They went through the 70s, 80s, and 90s, I believe, if I'm correct.
Yeah, they were great. Yeah.
But they were... But again, classic rock kind of was faded out, kind of knocked out, or kind of phased out of pop.
Yeah. Remember John's statement. John music, goes, I don't know which, John Lennon, remember the controversy? I don't know which would die first, rock and roll or Christianity. And it's obvious, rock and roll died out first. Christianity is still going strong.
That's right. And they're the rebels too. That's another story for another day.
Yeah.
Eddie, this leads me to this whole 80s thing, this discussion, all your great movies and everything. I was always perplexed as to, considering all the parts and all the movies you were in, various role sizes, various roles, actually, that you never really were in the Revenge of the Nerds movie.
Yeah, I asked Adam Field. He did a film I did, which is one of my better B movies, called The Whoopee Boys. I don't know if you've seen that one.
It's a funny little. I was going to bring up Cross Courts today.
Yeah, that was funny. It was a funny little B movie. It was a B movie, but it was done by Paramount Studios, so it should have been an A film. I call it a B movie because it kind of is, but it was an A film because it was a Paramount movie. It was a really funny film. I thought Marshall Warfield, I loved. Michael Keaton, I loved. Michael O'Keefe, I'm sorry. Marshall Warfield, I loved. Paul Rodriguez, a little bit of a mixed bag. We would go out together and have lunch. Paulie would pick on me while we shot, but he was actually a nice guy at heart. We'd go out on the weekends. We would have a dish I never heard of. We'd have chili and pancakes. He liked chili, and we'd go out and have chili and pancakes. And it was actually delicious. We'd get out and talk together like friends. Then we'd go on the set again Monday, and he'd pick on me again. But I think that was a funny film. Anyway, what was the question? I forgot your question.
It was why you weren't in Revenge of the Nerds. I thought.
Oh, that okay. Yes, you're right. I wanted the answer. And anyway, Adam Field, our producer on Whoopee Boys, was one of the producers of Revenge of the Nerds. And I, of course, asked him that question. I go, I get that question all the time. Why weren't you in Revenge of the Nerds? He said the joke of the film was they wanted to get straight guys, put glasses on them, and make them be nerds. And he said, you were already a nerd. He said, that's why. Now, I don't know if he was giving me a line, like guys give women a line, but I don't know if that was a line, but that's what he told me. There's me and Maggie. That's Midnight Madness.
Yep.
Maggie Roswell, I love. She's a doll. She's in The Simpsons, and I love working with her. She was so wonderful to work with. I just love her.
Yeah, I had to throw a Midnight
Madness. That's a great photo. You have some great pictures, Chris. That's a great photo of us.
It's amazing what the internet can do. But again, so that was the joke. I had to throw a Midnight Madness picture out there because we talked about it. But I always wondered about that. But I guess that makes a lot of sense. Make the non-nerds the nerds. But again, you know what? Sometimes I think you would have been funny in that movie. I gotta say. Yeah.
I don't know if Adam was giving me a line. It always sounded a little bit weird to me, but maybe he was being honest.
It can happen.
Yeah.
But the fact is, you did so many other great movies, and I did like the Whoopee Boys. I did want to talk about that because
the Whoopee Boys is a funny film. Yeah. A lot of my movies were actually funny. They were actually funny. Some I'm ashamed of, like a Polish Vampire in Burbank. I'm ashamed of, but some I'm proud of, even though they bombed. Polish Vampire in Burbank, I think is the worst thing I ever did. But we don't have to get into that.
The thing I liked Eddie in that movie because he went along with all the cool stuff the other guys did, but you did attempt to play cross courts, and that was pretty cool.
Yeah, that was funny. Yeah, it was fun. And I actually made a goal. You know how we shoot the ball through that hole in the mouth or something? It's impossible. But I swear to God, I actually did it. That for some reason I smacked the ball and it went right in the hole, and everybody gave me applause. I remember it was a big moment. I actually did make that goal.
Wow, they should have put that in the movie. There we go.
They should have put that in the movie, yeah. But there were funny gags. I remember the Charm School. I love the Charm School. So that lady was, one of the ladies in the Odd Couple's one of my favorite films. She was one of the Pigeon sisters. I forget her name, but she was a hilarious lady. Carol something.
I remember the Pigeon Sisters. I think.
Yeah.
They dated. Yeah, they
dated Felix and Oscar.
Oscar every once in a while.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
That was fun.
She was a wonderful comedian. She was a British comedian, I guess, but she was hilarious.
I also always meant to ask, how much of Menlo Schwartzer was in Mandark when you kind of created that character and that laugh?
I didn't consciously think of it, but I can see that's how I play the mad scientist. It's pretty much the same thing. Now the laugh came from the best. Now here's the thing: in films, in the movie world, everybody says, I don't want to get political, but they all go, why are women so underrepresented as directors? It's male dominated. I would guess maybe 90% of the directors are men. Now, maybe it's changed, but in my time, I would say it was at least 90%. I work for only 2 women directors. I work for Pat Birch in Grease 2 and a lovely lady named Anita Rosenberg in The Saw the Killer Bimbos. Anyway, in the animation world, for some reason, it's the reverse. Women dominate it. It's like, I'd say it's 90% women. I've hardly ever worked for men in the animation world. All the cartoon shows are directed by women for some reason. But anyway, there's a lovely lady named Colette Sunderman. She's my favorite director. And I was getting ready for Mandark. And the line goes, Mandark laughs. And she goes, how are you going to do that? And I go, oh, I'll go my laugh. And I had a 1-tone laugh. I go, ha. I go, ha. I'll hold the line. And she goes, no. She goes, do it there. She goes, why don't you chop it up? Chop it in. And I go, ha, 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 ha. And I chopped it. And that became the Mandark laugh. But Colette's the one that thought of that. That's why. And that's kind of Mandark's trademark.
Yes, and Mandark became a big star in that movie in his own right, because from a nemesis that was kind of a I guess a 1 or 2 dimensional character to begin with. You made that your own character.
I loved it. I did 20 episodes. I loved working on that show. Right. Chris Cavanaugh, unfortunately, she left us too soon. She passed away. Now here's what happened. Chris was on the show. Then another girl replaced her, Candy Milo was great. I love Candy. Chris originated the character, but Chris died young. It was sad, and I miss her. She was so great to work with. I did the first ever radio spot with Chris. We did a radio show. We were husband and wife. That was back in the days. No. They still have radio commercials. We used to do radio commercials. Chris and I were husband and wife in a commercial.
I think they still have them somewhere along the line.
Okay, yeah, she was great.
But I like the fact that Mandark developed a little bit too, with the crush on Dee Dee, and then the rivalry between Dexter and Mandark. It seems like Mandark became more and more popular each time he was on. Then
I did 20 episodes. and he kind of grew as a character. Remember, they discovered his name was Susan.
Yes,
it got to be really out there. So let's not even get into that. But he was named evil. Susan. He had hippie parents.
One I remember, again, the development of Mandark was Monkey versus Quackor, where Dexter had the lab monkey and you had the lab duck, and they had to fight each other. Yeah.
These are great pictures, Chris, by the way. They're wonderful. Every picture you put up is wonderful.
As I said, I'm pretty good at clicking a mouse, I guess.
Yeah, you're good.
Thanks a lot, Eddie. And I want to jump back to... Okay, I want to get to Twilight Zone because I do want to ask a little about your fandom of the Twilight Zone. But
oh my goodness, sure. My all-time favorite show.
It was one of mine. I do want to get into that. But first, one of the movies that you did actually lead was one of my favorites, a very underrated flick with some of the toughest gangsters in movie history, or the biggest tough guys in movie history.
Yes.
Mob Boss. And Mob Boss was
I love that movie.
A lot of fun.
My sister Barbie to this day said that's the best thing you ever did. That was your best movie. My cool Mob Boss story is making out with Morgan Fairchild. There was a scene in the movie where Morgan kisses me, and it's that old scene where the guy kissed the pretty girl, the nerd kisses the pretty girl, and he turns around and his glasses are fogged up, So we're doing that scene, and Morgan goes, do you want to rehearse? So, I do an Oliver Hardy take to the camera. Are you fucking serious? Morgan Fairchild is basically asking me to make out. So, Morgan held my head to the left. She held my head to the right. We kissed straight on. She held my head back, and I got to make out. And I'll tell you, she's a great kisser. She has really soft lips. She's a beautiful kisser. Anyway, my other Morgan Fairchild scene is we would always have lunch, all of us together. We'd all have lunch. I'd have lunch with the cast of the crew. We'd all eat outside. And Morgan would always have lunch alone in her trailer. So one day Morgan comes up to me, hey, Eddie, do you want to have lunch with me? So, of course, being a guy, I'm thinking, I'm going to score with Morgan Fairchild. I'm thinking, this is like summer of 42. This older woman, she wants to make love. I'm thinking, I'm going to screw Morgan Fairchild. My God, she's only 10 universe out of my league, But so I went up. I waited all day. I'm excited. I took a bath in cold water, of course, to calm myself down. So I knock on her door. I'm thinking, this is it. So she entered the door. She wants to actually have lunch. So we had our lunch brought in, and it was the most lovely lunch I ever had. We talked, and she told me her whole life story. She told me about growing up in Texas, how Warren Beatty had a crush on her. She was on the set of Bonnie and Clyde, and what it was like being a sex symbol and blah, blah, blah. And it was just a lovely lunch. She's a lovely lady. And then I later did I did a signing show with her. I saw her later on, but she's one of the most lovely people I've ever worked with. And that was a great lunch.
Well, again, it's good to hear that they're really good people in Hollywood, because
and you were referring to the gangsters. You know Mike Mazurki, right? That guy. Hey, boss. He's like the ultimate. We don't know his name necessarily, but he's been in like 300 movies. Everybody knows his face. And I was scared to death. I'm on the set with Mike Mazurki, the ultimate gangster. He's like about 6'5". He's got this huge body, like a tree. And I was terrified. Anyway, the last scene in the movie, I had to make that big speech, and I actually rehearsed really hard, and I delivered the speech. It took about 2 or 3 takes, but I did it. And I finally finished it. So the next day I go on the set, and I haven't talked to Mike the whole time. He goes, "Hey, kid, you did good. You did a good speech." He said something like that, "Thank you so much, sir." I'm like a little kid, but I was so flattered. And I think that was Mike's last film. I'm pretty sure that was his last movie.
Yeah, he was. Yeah, it was.
He worked with Sinatra and the Rat Pack. He worked with Frank Sinatra and the Rat Pack.
Right, and he was in a lot of. He was in those.
He was in everything. He was in so many films. He probably goes back to the 50s. I'll bet.
And William Hickey also was one of the great.
William Hickey. Sadly, he died of AIDS. I think he was a great guy. He was a wonderful, marvelous guy. I loved William. Everybody on that film I loved. Stuart Whitman I loved. It was a pleasure. And of course, Fred Olen Ray is one of the great directors I've ever worked for. I rate him. Bob Zemeckis' best, Spielberg second, and I think Fred Olen Ray might be third. Fred Olen Ray is the best comedy director. He was a wonderful comedy director. I love working for him.
And the funny thing was putting you in a lot of the characters, you kind of an amalgamate of the characters you've done over the years in the same room in the same movie with these mafia tough guys. And just juxtaposing the two, which I don't think anybody's ever done at that point.
No, Fred's an innovator in a lot of ways. He did some clever stuff. There's a scene in Surf 2. Fred didn't do Surf 2. But you know that scene in Surf 2 where the two families are together, where there's a split screen and the families are talking?
Yeah.
You know that one?
Yes, I remember that.
Yeah, I've never seen that done in any other film. That was really our director was named Randall Badot, and I remember he didn't get along well with Ron Palillo. They were like at each other. They didn't get along. But that scene was really innovative. That was a brilliant scene by Randall.
So, again, innovation. Sometimes the innovation comes from places you don't expect. Yeah, and that's a great thing about. I know people call them B movies, but you can do things with a lower budget movie that you really can't do with the higher budget ones, because you're taking more of a risk in one factor, where in the other factor you're saying, well, I'm not spending a lot of money on this, but I can try to do this, and this, and see if it catches on. Right. That's
a good point. You're right. It's not as big a risk. You're right. Whereas if you're working on a big budget film, you can't do that. Now, Grease is an interesting either or. It's kind of both sides of the coin. Grease, of course, was an A movie. We had John Travolta and Olivia Newton-John was A. But remember, the budget for Grease was rock bottom. The budget for Grease was $6 million. That'll basically buy a commercial nowadays. That'll get you commercial, not even in prime time. But at that time, it was $6 million. And now it's probably made like $500 million now. It's one of the great investments in history.
Oh yeah, and of course a sequel. You were the sequel too, by the way.
Yeah, which sucked. I thought the sequel was bad. I love Pat Burt. She was a super nice lady, but I thought the movie was terrible. But I have people who like it better than Grease. I've met people like that.
It was terrible, but it was actually well done in a lot of ways too. The singers were good. The studio was pretty good. The direction was good. The dancing. Mm-hmm. So really, I get it. People were expecting Grease 1, or they were kind of hoping for a Grease 1, which you weren't going to be able to do that. But
that's a good point.
Fun. Yeah, there's a lot of fun.
That's a good point. You're right.
Yeah,
Grease was lightning in a bottle. So you're right. You're never going to do that again. So I see your point. Maybe I'm too hard on it because my part was smaller. Grease, I have such a small part in both films, but Grease, at least they're clearly discernible. I get my whole pie in the face, and I'm so proud of that little scene. I get messed up by the people are so proud of that. Grease 2, I fall out of the bus, and that lasts about 2 seconds, and then they show me up in the stands throwing paper down. It was so quick. I'm even less in Grease 2 than Grease 1, so I'm probably a little bit bitter.
You had some of the
but I'll tell you, Maxwell Caulfield. Well, maybe. Oh yeah, that's right. How long have you been in this school? How long have you been in this country?
Everybody made it. They just didn't have enough acts.
Yeah. Maxwell Caulfield was a super nice guy. The first day on the set, he invited me over for tea and cookies. Wow. The first day, he's such a sweet guy. He had Eddie come in, and we're talking. tea and cookies, and I'm thinking to myself, this film is going to tank. I'm going, there's no way this is going to fly with this guy as the lead. He's the sweetest guy in the world, but I didn't think he could carry film because Grease was John is this macho guy in the leather jacket, and this guy was the contrast. So I kind of knew it wouldn't do good. I only talked to Michelle Pfeiffer one day on the set. She was there, and she was Marilyn Monroe beautiful. She was she just knocked you out of your socks. I mean, I looked at her and I was mesmerized, and I walked over, I go, you're beautiful. And she goes, thank you. That was the only time I ever spoke to her. To this day, I haven't talked to her since.
Oh, well,
she was electrically beautiful. It was electric. How some women, I guess, for some people, some men, it's like a young Elvis, I guess, it's like seeing that incredible beauty. You can't believe anybody is that gorgeous. And she was that gorgeous.
I remember the movie. I guess the whole thing was the opposite of Danny and Sandy. Then they had Sandy's cousin with a tough girl and everything else.
Right. That was the shtick they went on.
I was always a Didi Khan fan, so I was willing to give that movie a chance because I knew she was going to be in it again.
Yeah,
as Frenchie, and I always like Didi Khan. Everything she's in is always pretty cool.
She's super nice. She's a really nice person. I mean, I just love her as a person. Yeah, they brought me back, her and Craterface was back. Dennis C. Stewart, who was a really nice guy. Yeah. He was another one who we lost to AIDS too. I think it was a sad loss.
Way too young.
Yes. His personality belied his face. He looked like a natural villain. I don't mean that in a cruel way. I'm just saying he looked like a heavier villain with that crater face. But he was actually a sweet, gentle, nice guy. He couldn't have been nicer. When I was on Grease, I would literally take the bus to the set every morning. Literally, I'd take this, and this was out to Venice High School in those days. I would take the bus. I'd get up at like 4:00 in the morning. My call was like 6. So I take an hour and a half bus ride out there. So I was talking to her one day on the set, and Dennis goes, "Do you have to take the bus to the set?" I go, "Yeah." He goes, "Not anymore. I'm going to give you a ride every day." So he'd take me to the set every day. Dennis would give me a ride every day on the set. He was an incredibly nice guy.
Oh, it's amazing how, look, being nice kind of, it comes back to you. Let's put it that way. Okay. I'm sure you're a nice guy to everybody else you meet on the sets too. And they're like, "Hey, this is a great guy. I wouldn't mind giving a ride to work," or let's take him to lunch. Yeah.
I hope so. Well,
you give what you get. You get what you give,
Okay, I don't want to get too metaphysical. We can talk metaphysics, but sometimes I do believe ultimately the universe is fair. I do believe ultimately it's fair, but it's not apparent. It's not always apparent. Sometimes it looks like nice people do get kicked in the balls, and it looks like the villains, the ones with the black hats, are successful. But I do believe ultimately there is a justice in the universe. Yeah, I believe it plays out.
I think we all get punched in the balls all the time.
And we all think. I think all of us think of ourselves as a nice guy or a nice woman.
Right. Or at least we want to be, or we want to try to be. Again, I want to get into this before we finish up the conversation. I loved Twilight Zone from when I was a youngster on. Watching my grandmother all the time. My favorite. I don't. Nobody cares what my favorite is, but I like the one.
No, I care. I'd like to hear them.
Well,
tell me your favorites.
I like the one with Jack Klugman and his son Pip. Who was,
I thought, okay, I got you on that. I like Chris. I like the pool player better. I thought you were going to say one of my favorites is the pool player. That's the only time I've only liked Jonathan Winters twice. I liked him in the pool player episode, and I liked him in Mad, Mad, Mad World. But I was never a Jonathan Winters fan. But I'm a nut for the pool player. That's one of my top 3 episodes. I love the pool player episode.
Well, that's what I want to get from you. What are your top 3 episodes? I think we know one now.
Okay. The pool player I love. My all-time favorite, and it might seem like a weird choice, but it chokes me up every time. And I like to watch particularly at Christmas, is the school teacher, where the school teacher comes back and his class comes back to life, and they tell him what he meant to him, what they meant to him. That one makes me cry every time. I love that episode. I love the Jack Klugman episode. And I'm trying to think, what would be another one I love? I don't know. I don't like. I hate the Charles Bronson one. Tell me your top 3, and then I'll see if I can think of my third.
Well, I think I'm not sure if I have a top 3 at all. I did like the one. I did like the one. See, now you got me going here because the airplane.
It's kind of put on the spot. It's like when you say your top 3 Beatles one. No, because you got to think of it. You go, what are your favorite Beatles songs? It's like saying, who are the 3 hottest women you've ever seen? It's like it takes a minute to think of these.
That might be a little quicker, but I will say this. I did, and sometimes I don't remember the titles because, again, it's sometimes. No,
you can just give me the episodes. I'll know them.
Right. The airplane one was good. I know it's cliche to say the airplane one, but that was a great
one. Where they
one.
see the dinosaurs?
The one with William Shatner.
The William Shatner's a classic, yeah.
Right.
I'll tell you another one I love. I love the one with the professor. I love the professor, both the ones with Russell Johnson. Those are 2 of my favorites. The one where Caswell comes back, Albert Salmi comes back and he gets hung, I love that. And I love the other one of the professor. What's the other one? He did 2 of my favorites.
I think I do remember the one I like the most is the guy with the film. He created his wife. He created some people.
Yes, I love that with Keenan Wynn. I love that with Keenan Wynn. That's one of the best episodes. Yeah, that's the one because Rod Serling's there. Rod Serling makes it appear. That's the only one I think Rod Serling appeared in.
Right.
Yeah, that is one of my favorites. I love that one. What's the other one with Russell Johnson? Oh, the one with Lincoln. They killed Lincoln. Remember, they're going to assassinate Lincoln. Those are two of my favorites.
It's hard to imagine what would have happened if they just didn't go out that night. The Lincolns.
Yeah.
But again, that's a different story. Maybe Booth would have gotten him. Maybe he wouldn't have gotten the chance. But that's just
Well, you know what happened? I don't know if you know. I read the book Killing Lincoln. His bodyguard, this idiot, took a break. They had a bodyguard there at Ford's Theater. He was a bodyguard, and he was right by Lincoln. But he went out to get a drink or something. Not to go about, but he went out to get a drink right in the middle. Are you serious? And he went out, and then that's when Booth came and killed him. But the bodyguard didn't do his job. It's that simple. He didn't do his job.
Putting it into perspective, I used to watch the press conferences with Reagan and Carter, and of course when I was younger. I noticed this when I was younger. After my father pointed out to me, it was like, see these guys, that's the Secret Service. They're all looking around like this. Their heads are around. They're ready to take a bullet for the guy. This guy is supposed to be the equivalent to the Secret Service. I guess they really it wasn't as good as it was.
Yeah. Now, don't take my word. Take my word as gospel, but I'm pretty sure. I'd say I'm 90% sure that is what happened. You could Google it. What happened? But I'm pretty sure the bodyguard was very inefficient. I think he stepped away literally. And Booth, by the way, it's an interesting story. Booth had performed in front of Lincoln before, weeks before, a month before. He had been in a play, and he looked right at Lincoln, and he said something like that, like, I hate you. He said or something, or I'm going to get you. It's some kind of ironic line he said to Lincoln. He was also at Lincoln's inaugural. He was at the inaugural for Lincoln, either in 1860 or 1864. Booth was there. There's a picture of him in the crowd.
It's amazing. These a good Secret Service bunch would have picked up on that, but again,
that's when they started the Secret Service because of that. That's what started it.
What's this hindsight about 100 and what? It's like 170 something years later.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting to surmise what would Lincoln have done those last 3 years. What would he have done? Good things or what? But he was something. He was definitely something.
So. It's nice to have you back. It's nice to have you on social media again. You put up.
Thank you so much,
stuff.
Chris.
It's fun. Eddie, anything cool coming around the corner for you?
Stevie's got me, I think, a low budget film he set me up for. I won't tell you anything because I'm not sure what it is. I think 1 or 2 low budget films. I'm doing a lot of these podcasts, and with guys like you, this has been such a pleasure. It's been such a joy. And the podcast, and that's about it. There's not a lot to do in South Carolina. The people two things about South Carolina. The people are the nicest I've ever met. And also they got a lot of great restaurants out here. I love the restaurants out here. They're wonderful. And Stevie's putting some weight back on me. I weighed myself today. I'm back to 148. So that's good.
Well, congratulations. That's
I was skin and bones in that hospital. I mean, I was really in bad shape.
Oh no, we're glad that you got out okay. And people, things happen, and I'm glad somebody figured it out, and you were able to be taken care of, and you're back and you're well again, Eddie. And
Thank you so much.
I'm sure your fans are very happy to hear that too, and see
Thank
you
you.
here.
Thanks,
and
Chris.
know this, yeah. And thank you from the bottom of my heart for being on the program. I loved having you here. You're always one of my favorite actors. And I know it sounds like I'm brown-nosed fanboying, but the fact is, you've given a lot of people a lot of reasons to smile and laugh over the years. You've done a lot of great things, and you had fun, and you actually always looked like you were genuinely having fun while you were on screen.
Absolutely. Yeah, I did. Thank you so much. You're very kind.
Well, thank you. And once again, have a wonderful day. I'm Chris Cordani. Thank you all for joining us on the Outhouse Lounge. And if you really like the show, hit us with a subscription or maybe a comment. Tell us what you think. Maybe one of your favorite Eddie Deezen roles. We'd love to hear that stuff or see that right in the comment section. Again, Eddie, thank you for being with us.
Sure, Chris. My pleasure. Take care. Happy spring.
And we'll see you again.
Okay.
On the Outhouse Lounge.